Hello, my fellow Wavy Willards lawsuits. I'm Mr. Church. Are you looking for a silly build, but you still want to be able to do ridiculous damage? Well, I may have the thing for you. A couple of years ago, I did make a bash damage build, and it was very fun, and it did good damage, but it actually was nerfed a couple of updates ago, and I've been kind of sad about it, boo-hooing left and right. Now, there were some recent buffs to bash damage, including base damage buffs, some ghoul perks that add bash damage, and also buffs to bayonets in general. So I thought it would be fun to revisit this and see if I can get this to be better than I had it before. And oh boy, I think I've succeeded. So in today's video, I'm going to be showing you this build. I'm going to be showing you some of the combat with it, and also, of course, all the specials and perks and stuff, so you can see what makes me so very special. Before we get into all the build stuff, the perks, the gear, all that stuff, I need to talk a little bit about how bash damage works, how it's calculated, and stuff like that. I'm gonna have timestamps in the video, so if you think this is gonna be a snooze fest and you don't really want to know how the build works, you just want to follow it, you can skip ahead to that part. Now, for those of you who have big glasses, I'm going to be getting into all the details and the nitty-gritty, so we're going to start by talking about how bash damage works in this game. Now, in the past, bash damage used to be buffed by strength, and unfortunately, a few updates ago, they actually removed this, and that no longer affects it whatsoever. You can have 400 strength, and you're going to be having the same amount of bash damage as you would without it. Now, this is a massive nerf because my last bash damage build was based on just stacking as much strength as I could with the tiny little bits of bash damage that we could get before. So the things that buff bash damage are base damage of the weapon, and that includes with weapon mods on it. So you could have, put a more powerful receiver on it and do more bash damage because the base damage of the weapon is higher. Also, things that specifically buff, quote, bash damage, so that's like perks, legendary effects, and stuff like that. So there's the basher, the basher's perk for your gun, and stuff like that. You've got a lot of different perks that buff it. You also have weapon mods, like I mentioned, and you also have a mutation. The Twisted Muscles mutation buffs bash damage as well. The other things that buff bash damage are armor penetration. So, mods and perks that affect that will affect your damage on bashing. And also weak point damage is still calculated. And that's the little yellow number when you hit something. That's the weak point of the creature. And finally, and this is what the build is really based on, sneak attack bonuses still work on bash damage. And that means you can hit ridiculous numbers because they just added a huge buff to stealth, and it's a multiplicative buff. So this build, we're stacking up as much of our stealth as possible so that stealth bonus is going to be massive, and we're stacking up our weak point damage as well. And that's how I found the key to happiness. Anyway, for those who are just joining because you skipped ahead, this is the specials that you're going to be using for the build. And these are the specials. And keep in mind, I am using legendary perks, so that stuff is going to be affected as well. I'm going to start out looking at our legendary perks because we do have some of these legendary specials. I have Apple, but I don't have my agility maxed yet. Once I do that, my stealth is going to be better. And then I don't have my endurance maxed either. I also have action diet. This is just so I don't have to worry about taking drugs to keep my feral meter filled. And I just have 1 star. And that's enough if you're just going around killing stuff. And finally, I have far-flung fireworks. Now, oddly enough, when you bash someone, it counts it as a ranged weapon for this perk. Enemies killed with a ranged weapon have a 13% chance to explode. Obviously, if you get this maxed out, it's a 20% chance. So every once in a while, this stuff will blow up. It's pretty fun. And that gets me to another point. Some perk cards that affect ranged damage do not buff your bash damage, and some do buff your bash damage. Most of them don't. Most perk cards that say something about your ranged attacks don't actually work in bash damage. First, I have a lot of strength. I don't actually need all the perks that I have in strength. Traveling pharmacy, I don't need it. But the ones you do need are radioactive strength. This is one of the most powerful perks in the game. I don't know if it's bugged or something, but it's doing a hell of a lot of damage. The important thing is to keep your rads high so that this will always have goo to blow up with. But this makes your bashing attacks do a hell of a lot more, which is why if you're doing this build, I highly recommend you do it on a ghoul, although you can do it on a human, it just won't hit as hard. Now you also have Basher, this is the our initial one, and gun bashing does 50% damage and 75% limb damage. And that limb damage is actually pretty juicy because we're going to be comboing it with some other cards. Now I also have a scatter shot. 20% of the damage dealt to a limb is applied to all limbs. And so, because we're doing limb damage with our bashing, this will actually cripple the beast. If we can't actually initially kill it with one shot, it'll cripple it because hitting it once does 20% of that limb damage to all of its limbs. And it's actually a lot because we're buffing the limb damage in other areas as well. I've got blocker, and this is just so I take less damage. I'm going to be up close and personal fighting, and I don't want my glow being taken away by getting hit because I need that to attack with. So this is just for that. And then I have bear arms and bulletstorm. This was an idea I had that I would use, and it was going to be fine. But you just can't build these stacks up with a slower rate of fire weapon. In order to utilize each stack of Bulletstorm increases your bash damage by 5%. It just isn't worth it. But technically, I could shoot this weapon over and over again and build up these stacks. It would just take about 30 minutes, and it isn't worth it because if you crash or if you have to hop servers or log out or whatever, you lose all your stacks. You have to start over. So it's really not worth it. But there are ways to build those stacks up over time. And we also have Number Cruncher. Your weapons have 2% increased damage per AP cost, and because this buffs the base damage of your weapon, it actually does buff your bash damage. So what we're doing is we're putting a bunch of mods on the weapon that make the AP cost super high, because we're not going to be shooting it anyway. Now, Tank Killer actually does buff our bash damage, because like I mentioned earlier, armor penetration helps us ignore all of that armor, and it makes us do more damage. Grenadier is good because I have several sources of explosives, and so this will make that explosion radius higher, so if you hit like a bunch of grouped up enemies, it'll hit multiple of them, and it's actually pretty juicy. In Endurance, I just have stuff to make me more tanky, like Life Giver. That's pretty nice. The more HP I have, the more glow I can have, and if I'm going to be using glow to attack with, it's pretty good to have high endurance. Through Hiker, this is just because I have a bunch of food items on me. You don't need that for this build. Adamantium Skeleton, because I don't want to ever have to take a stim pack, because that's annoying if you're a ghoul. So what I have is a combination of Adamantium Skeleton and then certain armor mods, which I'll show later, and that adds up to 100% limb damage reduction, so we don't have to worry about that ever happening. Fireproof, again, we're trying to save our glow, so this just is another way that we take less of an attack from flames. Thick Skin, we take less ballistic damage. It's a pretty good ghoul perk. And then finally, Glowing Gut, this is really good for keeping our glow high. We have this, and we just take Toxic Goo, and we can keep that pretty high. Charisma isn't really that important. You have United Ordeal. This one's pretty good if you can find a ghoul to be on a team with. That's just good for like the overall stats and everything. Strange in Numbers, this is the best perk card in the game. It's extremely overpowered. For what you get, it's really nice. I love it. Always run with it. And for the other point in Charisma, you don't even need another point in Charisma, really. I've got Bodyguards. That's just to get a little bit more tankiness because I'm wearing light armor. But you could honestly run with other stuff. Intelligence, I'm just running Stimpaks and right away heal faster. In the unfortunate event that you run out of glow and you take a tiny bit of damage, your radiation isn't going to pop up the same amount until your health is at 100%. So making sure your Stimpaks get you to that as quickly as possible is how you can get your glow back faster. So it's a pretty good card to have in my opinion. although you don't use it very often, but when you do use it, it's pretty helpful. Demo Expert, like I said, multiple sources of explosions. This will make them do more damage. And then this is just because lately my weapons have been getting eviscerated, and this helps a little bit. Agility is very important because this build relies heavily on stealth. There's also a lot of stuff that I could run in agility, but I just didn't have the space for. First of all, we're using Escape Artist. Again, stealth is very important, and sneak as well, harder to detect while sneaking. I feel like they recently nerfed stealth because it's way harder to be stealthy, in my opinion, but these cards are really essential to the build. Now, Mr. Sandman is one of the reasons why we're doing so much damage without using a bayonet. Instead of using a bayonet, we're using a silencer, and that's adding 100% sneak attack damage because of this card. So it's actually very powerful. Remember that, the sneak attack is one of the things that does matter when you're bashing. I'm also running Gunslinger, which adds to my weak spot damage, and then I'm running Gunslinger Expert, which also adds to my weak spot damage per onslaught stack. So I've got 3 stacks from that, and just for the weak spot buff, I'm also running Gunslinger Master. This adds 10 to that max stacks. So our max stacks is going to be 13 onslaught stacks, and because of this, we're running this card. It's going to be always at 13. It's always going to be maxed out because we're never even firing our weapon. If you're not sure about what I'm talking about when I'm talking about onslaught and stuff like that, you want a refresher on how that stuff works, I have a whole video where I go over all the onslaught stuff, and I'll link that in the description if I can remember to, but who knows what I'll actually be remembering. Nothing, probably. And that left me with 1 slot available because I maxed out my agility, and so I threw on Enforcer, and your small guns gain stagger chance and limb damage. Now this actually does affect your bash damage, limb damage, so I put this on. I could only run 1 star of it, but with all the other limb damage stuff we have, it all adds up, so it's pretty powerful. I'm also running Ricochet. This is just for tankiness. It's not going to be super effective because my luck is super low, but it is a little bit of something. Class Freak is to mitigate the negatives of all my mutations, very important. And then finally, equally important, if not more important, the Ghoul has a special weak point damage card as well. And because of this and the radioactive strength, this is why the Ghoul is going to be way better with this build, but like I said before, not necessary. It'll just hit harder because of this card and that other card. This is the weapon that I'm going to be using for this build. There are many weapons that have a lot higher bash damage because their base damage is higher, but you can't add the same amount of stealth buffs to them, which is why I ultimately chose this one. In the recent update, they buffed sneak attack, and they actually made certain weapons have a higher sneak attack multiplier, and hunting rifles have a ×3 multiplier standard. Now when you add a silencer to a weapon, they also made it so you get a bonus in sneak attack as well. So when you add those things together, and then you also have the Mr. Sandman perk, which adds 100% sneak attack damage to silenced weapons, and then finally I'm using the Stalker's effect, which gives me plus 100% sneak attack damage. Now usually the primary effect doesn't have any effect whatsoever on your bash damage, but because this doesn't necessarily buff your weapon damage, but instead buffs your stealth multiplier, this actually does greatly buff your bash damage as long as you're in stealth. So the other important perk, of course, is bash damage. We have bash damage on there. And then agility, this is important too because agility affects your stealth. So like I said before, strength no longer affects your bash damage, and so the best 3-star that I could put there is agility, just for the stealthiness. Last but certainly not least, we have the Fracturer's effect. When crippling limbs, they explode and deal up to 50 explosion damage to nearby targets. Now this is super nice because we have a lot of ways to get lots of limb damage, and so you're gonna pretty much always cripple limbs in one shot. And because of we have a perk that spreads that limb damage to all the other limbs, you're pretty much guaranteed to cripple at least something when you hit someone. And so every single time that blows up, and then you have your demo expert buffing the damage, and you've got the grenadier buffing the explosion radius, and then sometimes far-flung fireworks will go off when they die as well, adding another explosion to it. So it's pretty nice just adding extra damage to the bash in that way. Also, huge thanks to Evil Kitten in the Discord for gifting me these mod boxes for this weapon, because I was really looking for some of these things, and I was having a hard time sourcing them because this character doesn't know shit. Now, the basic mods that are on this are pretty important. Like I mentioned before, the suppressor is very important. Because of this multiplier of sneak attack damage, you do more damage with this than if you were to put a large bayonet on there, even though that says it buffs you 75% melee damage. It's nothing compared to a multiplicative buff. Now, I've got this scope on it, and one of the reasons is because it increases the AP cost a little bit, and we have Number Cruncher, but the other main reason is so I can use it as kind of just a way to scout around, look around. I basically have binoculars in my hand, find stuff. It's kind of nice to have, but I don't really snipe with the weapon. Now, the perforating magazine is pretty important because this adds armor penetration. Now, you can either use the bruising stock or the forceful stock, depending on it's mostly about aesthetic at this point. I like this one just because it's a little bit less heavy. I didn't do anything with the barrel except make sure you use a long barrel if you're running Number Cruncher, because that will add to your AP cost. And remember, the higher the AP cost, the more damage we're going to be doing. As you can see, those numbers will drop if I put a different, like a short barrel on. So we want to have any kind of long barrel. It doesn't matter which one. I just picked the one that was the lightest weight. And most importantly, the receiver that does the most damage on this weapon is the refined 50 cal receiver. It does more damage than the hardened and more damage than the prime receiver. It's a sort of rare-ish one to find, and you can't get it from scrapping the weapon. I did find it from a vendor in Lewisburg Station, but allegedly it drops from a bunch of like treasure maps and stuff like that. So it's pretty nice to have a knowledge of where to get that when someone is telling you to put it on your weapon. I also named this Grandpa's Gun and put the rusty paint on it, which was from a season pass a few seasons ago. The lore is kind of like, you know how you have like that weapon that's handed down and no one knows how to clean it or take care of it, so it just gets all fucked up. And that's why we're bashing with it. You can't even shoot this weapon anymore, it'll blow up in your hands, but you can use it as a club. And that's the idea here. By the way, you can also use the pipe bolt and have similar results. It doesn't hit as hard as the hunting rifle, and it doesn't have as high of a stealth multiplier as the hunting rifle either. So it's not quite as good, but if you can't get a hunting rifle, which, you know, those things are hard to find, they're pretty rare, aren't they? You could use this, of course. The armor that I'm using for this build is the same exact armor that I used for my pistol build, and I didn't bother changing it out because the important part about this armor is that it's stealthy. So light armor, solar armor is light armor, is pretty nice to have. If you're a ghoul, solar armor is pretty good to have because the second that you take damage or over the glow and you lose all your glow, the second that happens, you're already healing back up. And like I said before, you want to make sure that you're at full health before you start popping rads, because rads don't heal you as much as they give you radiation. It's super slow. So it's faster to take a stim pack and then take rads if you drop below that. So I like to use solar armor for that reason. And also anyone on your team will be happy when you're healing them by being around them. I also have a mix of different specific, like mob specific protection, like hunters and troubleshooters and zealots. And then I also have a couple of Vanguard because I'm going to always be at full health because of my glow. Vanguard's always going to be at max. and this helps bridge the gap of having that light armor, giving me a little bit more damage and energy resistance. So for the second star, I have a few of these. Most of these are powered, and then I have one that's poisoners, just so I can have a little bit of poison resistance, but the rest of them are powered. I have a sentinels piece. I have 2 acrobats pieces, which keeps me from taking any fall damage, which is nice because if you like jump over a little cliff normally with a normal character and you lose a little bit of tiny little bit of health because you took a tiny little bit of fall damage, most people run with like healing factor. It just heals right back up immediately. Glow doesn't do that. So just reducing the amount of stupid damage you can take is the point of this armor. So the fall damage reduction is really nice, and I've really appreciated having it. So I have sentinels for the other ones. You take less damage while not moving, but you can run whatever you want there. On my chest, I'm running polymer, reduce incoming explosive damage, and that's simply because of all the explosions that I'm going to be triggering, and this will again make me take less glow damage. I have polymer on a few of these pieces, but I'm getting 60 for my armor, plus 40 gets me to 100. Like I said, I don't want to ever have to take a stim pack because I'm hobbling around. And also, if your limb is broken and your character kind of stands up, you're not in stealth anymore. So it's pretty nice to have full limb damage reduction. The last thing on here is battle loaders, and that's honestly, you don't really need to run that on this. Originally, I was going to try using the battle loaders with the bullet storm, and what I was going to do is I was going to try to get the bare arms to work. So what I was going to do is I was going to shoot, and then I was going to bash a turret, which does actually proc battle loaders, and it would refill my mag, so I never reloaded and lost the stacks. I did that. I sat there shooting and bashing. It took like 2 hours of my time, and it was no good. It did buff my bash damage, but it was not worth it. It was not worth it remotely. So it's possible to get even more damage out of this if you're wanting to min-max it. There's a couple of other things you can do as well, but this is one of the things you can do to min-max the build. So I did keep it on the build, but you probably don't need it, and you can put those points somewhere else, like into endurance or luck if you need more strength, or you can stack up a little bit more agility. Like I said, the battle loaders is good if you're going to use that method, but otherwise I recommend using probably a different 4-star effect. Now, I mentioned in passing that I was wearing light armor. That's really important because the weight of your armor does affect your stealth. In light armor, you are the stealthiest, and so that's pretty nice to have. For my under armor, I'm using shielded road leathers. This gives me more agility, and then +1 luck adds to my ricochet chance. Not a lot, but a little bit. But mostly this is for the agility, just so I can be more stealthy. Now, real quickly, these are the mutations I'm running. A journal reaction is actually good to run on a ghoul now because it's no longer basically a second bloodied buff, and it now is kind of like the adrenaline perk used to be, where you kill something and it stacks up damage. So this is pretty nice. It adds 6.25 damage per kill while on a kill streak, and I haven't actually noticed if that's affecting my buff bash damage or not, to be honest, but I just threw it on to have it. Bird Bones gives me that agility, which is really nice for stealth, and also the fall speed is nice to have. Carnivore is just so I can get more out of my pemmican. That's simply all there is to it. Grounded, I'm not using any energy weapons, so I don't have to worry about the negative energy buff, debuff, and then I get that +125 energy resistance. Again, I'm using light armor, so trying to get that buff higher is nice. Healing factor is good because if I ever lose my glow, it'll immediately start healing up, but you really don't need that, especially if you want to use a lot of chems and you don't want that to take a hit. Herd Mentality is probably one of the best mutations in the game. Just adding that +3 to specials when you're on a team is really nice. Marsupial, obviously, Speed Demon, obviously, and then Twisted Muscles. This says it gives you limb damage, which is nice, and also says it gives you melee damage. What it doesn't say, but it does do, is it gives you bash damage as well. So that's pretty nice. It does make a huge difference. And that limb damage actually makes a huge difference as well, because if you hit a massive creature and it's not enough to take it out, it still cripples everything on it. And that guy will fall down and you can walk right up to his face and finish him off. I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to my patrons and channel members for your support. If it wasn't for your support, I wouldn't be able to be making these funny videos. And if you're interested in supporting the channel in that way, the link for that will be in the description. But just liking, subscribing, commenting, those things all help the channel, and I appreciate it immensely. If you're not in the Discord, make sure you join the Discord. It's a great community, and also I stream on Twitch. Make sure you follow me on Twitch. Come hang out. And I'll see you guys in the next video.